You think you're helping. You think your empathy is your strength, your bridge to understanding, your gift to the wounded world. But there's something darker moving beneath it, something ancient, a hunger, not yours, but theirs. And if you're not careful, it will consume you. Because the empath's light attracts not only the lost, it attracts the feeding kind. Carl Jung once warned, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But some reactions corrode." You know this feeling. The room that drains you, the friend who leaves you exhausted, the relationship that feels like spiritual starvation. Yet you stay, because you think they need you. But Jung would tell you, what they need isn't you. It's your psychic energy, your life force, the very substance that keeps you whole. Empathy without boundaries becomes consumption, and the empath without self-awareness becomes prey. Empathy is not what most people think it is. It is not infinite compassion. It is not universal love. It is a psychic sensitivity, an open channel between your unconscious and the emotional field of others. Jung called this the participation mystique, a primitive state where the boundaries between self and other dissolve. When you feel another's pain so deeply that it becomes your own, you are no longer empathizing. You are merging. And in merging, you lose yourself. This is the empath's hidden danger. You mistake absorption for understanding. You think the suffering you feel is proof of your compassion, but it's evidence of something else entirely. An unconscious identification with another's shadow. Empaths, Jung would say, are those who live too close to the collective unconscious. They sense energies and emotions others repress. They become containers for what others refuse to face. And because they don't know how to hold that boundary, they end up carrying what isn't theirs. They are not just compassionate, they are porous. They absorb the world's darkness and believe it is their duty to heal it. But here is Jung's warning. When you unconsciously take on what others repress, you do not heal them. You enable them. You become the vessel that allows them to stay asleep. The empath, Jung would say, can become an unpaid therapist for the collective unconscious, and the world is more than willing to let you serve in that role, as long as you never realize that your empathy is being used to feed someone else's avoidance. Imagine this. A woman named Elise. She's the one everyone turns to. The listener, the caretaker, the rescuer. Her phone never stops buzzing with messages that start with, "I don't know who else to talk to." She absorbs it all. The panic, the guilt, the heartbreak, the rage. She listens until her chest tightens and her mind hums with the residue of other people's storms. But when she tries to speak her own truth, no one seems to hear. They thank her for being there, then disappear back into their chaos. Lighter now, emptier later. She lies awake at night, wondering why she feels like she's fading. Elise believes she's strong because she can hold everyone's pain. But she doesn't realize what she's really holding. The projections of others. Jung wrote that every person casts a shadow, a dark side full of traits the ego refuses to acknowledge. But those disowned parts don't vanish. They seek vessels, people who will carry them. Elise became that vessel. Each person who confided in her unknowingly transferred their unprocessed darkness into her. She became their psychic landfill, a place to dump shame, guilt, and fear without consequence. And here's the terrifying part. She thought this was love. She believed her exhaustion was proof of her goodness. But it was actually proof of her unconscious servitude to the collective shadow. Elise's story is not rare. It's the empath's archetype, the healer who bleeds, the light worker who burns out, the savior who becomes the sacrifice. You've been told your empathy makes you special. But what if it's a double-edged sword, one that cuts inward the more you try to save others? Empathy can be a form of control, a covert attempt to regulate the chaos around you by absorbing it. When you say, "I just can't stand to see them suffer," what you're really saying is, I can't tolerate the feeling that arises in me when they suffer. It's not compassion, it's identification. And Jung would call it a failure of differentiation, a collapse of boundaries between ego and other. You don't just feel for others, you become them. And in doing so, you lose the capacity to discern whose pain belongs to whom. That's how the feeding begins. Not through malice, but through unconscious exchange. Those who refuse to confront their own darkness instinctively seek out the empath, because the empath's openness provides psychic relief. You absorb their chaos, and they feel momentarily cleansed. You call it connection, but it's a transaction. They offload, you implode. Over time, you stop knowing where you end and they begin. You become a collage of borrowed emotions, stitched together by the illusion of self-sacrifice. And here's the paradox Jung would reveal. What you call empathy may actually be a fear of abandonment, a desperate attempt to stay needed by becoming indispensable to someone else's dysfunction. Because if they need you, they won't leave. And if they don't leave, you won't have to face the silence of your own emptiness. Jung saw archetypes as masks, expressions of the psyche's deeper forces. In the empath's shadow world, these masks form a psychic ecosystem, predators and prey orbiting each other in unconscious ritual. 1. The martyr. I'll suffer so you don't have to. The empath who equates exhaustion with virtue. They seek pain as proof of purpose. 2. The rescuer. I can fix them. The savior complex disguised as care. Their healing is a strategy to avoid their own wounds. 3. The confessor. You can tell me anything. They invite darkness, unaware they're being turned into a receptacle for guilt and shame. 4. The psychic sponge. I just feel everything. They confuse sensitivity with awareness, absorbing energy without filtration, drowning in frequencies not their own. 5. The mirror. I become what you need. They shapeshift to maintain connection, reflecting others' emotions until their own identity dissolves. 6. The idealist. Love will heal everything. They deny the existence of malice, projecting goodness onto those feeding on their naivety. 7. The silent host. I don't want to bother anyone. They internalize everyone's pain until it manifests as illness, fatigue, or depression. Each of these archetypes begins as empathy, but becomes pathology when the ego refuses to set boundaries. And here's the Jungian twist. You attract what you unconsciously repress. If you refuse to acknowledge your own capacity for manipulation, rage, or self-interest, you will magnetize those who embody it for you. The empath's shadow is the manipulator, the one who uses goodness as a mask for control, the one who unconsciously feeds on being needed. This is the hidden mirror. While others feed on your energy, you may be feeding on their dependence. Empathy becomes the most socially acceptable form of mutual exploitation. Jung's answer was never to suppress empathy, but to bring consciousness to it. The goal is individuation, becoming whole, differentiated, and self-contained. To feel deeply without dissolving. To love without merging. To hold space without being consumed. Here is the empath's path, the protocol for reclaiming your psychic sovereignty. Step 1. Recognize the transaction. Every emotional exchange has an energetic cost. When you feel drained after interacting with someone, it's not in your head. Your psyche is signaling a boundary violation. Ask, did I just give something I didn't consent to give? Step 2. Stop rescuing. Helping is not always healing. When you fix others' pain too quickly, you interrupt their alchemical process, their necessary confrontation with the shadow. Let them face it. Their discomfort is not your failure. Step 3. Own your shadow. Admit your hidden motives for helping. Do you crave validation, control, gratitude? Jung said, we meet ourselves time and again in 1,000 disguises on the path of life. The empath meets themselves in the eyes of the broken and must learn to see what they project there. Step 4. Create psychic containment. Before entering an emotionally charged situation, visualize a boundary. Not a wall, a membrane. Permeable to awareness, impermeable to emotional contagion. You can observe another's suffering without carrying it. Step 5. Withdraw projection. Every person who drains you is showing you a part of yourself that needs integration. Ask, what in me resonates with their need? What am I avoiding by tending to theirs? The draining stops when the projection is withdrawn. Step 6. Reclaim solitude. Silence is not loneliness, it is detox. In solitude, the foreign emotions fall away, and what remains is you, your unborrowed essence. Step 7. Practice discernment, not disconnection. Empathy doesn't require you to open to everyone, it requires wisdom to know who can meet you in reciprocity. Choose resonance over responsibility. Connection is mutual exchange, not energetic servitude. Something begins to shift the moment you stop identifying with the wound. The moment you say, not with defiance, but with clarity, this pain is not mine. That single sentence reorders the psychic field. You are no longer a vessel. You are a container. With edges, with agency, with sovereignty. You begin to notice the subtle difference between feeling and fusing. Feeling honors the boundary between two souls. Fusing erases it. For the first time you feel your own energy, pure, unadulterated by others' turbulence. It feels quieter, almost unfamiliar. And in that quiet, you realize how long you've lived in emotional noise. The empath who learns containment doesn't become cold, they become clear. They no longer mistake chaos for connection. They no longer confuse emotional intensity with intimacy. This is the empath's awakening. You stop trying to save people from their darkness and start walking beside them, holding a lantern instead of a sponge. You begin to see energy dynamics like weather systems. Some storms you can stand in, others require shelter. And you start asking a sacred question before entering any emotional climate. Is this my weather to endure? That's individuation, not isolation, integration. You become whole enough that you no longer need to dissolve into others to feel alive. Carl Jung believed that all human beings are connected through a vast psychic network, the collective unconscious. It is not metaphorical. It's the ancient field where every archetype, every emotion, every myth still lives. Empaths are not special because they feel more. They are simply more tuned to that field, the static and the signal, the whispers of collective pain echoing through unseen corridors. But sensitivity without consciousness becomes contamination. When the empath collapses under the weight of others' pain, something larger is at play. It's not just personal relationships, it's the collective shadow, trying to find expression through those who will carry it. Think of society itself as an energy system. The anxious, the narcissistic, the angry, the repressed, all of them leaking psychic material into the collective. Empaths, open and unguarded, act as the filtration system. They absorb and transmute the unintegrated emotions of a culture in denial. But no filter lasts forever, and Jung warned, when the unconscious is denied, it will possess those most receptive to its currents. That's the hidden tragedy of the empath. They become possessed by the suffering of others, believing it to be their mission, when in fact it's the collective's unfinished work. Your exhaustion, then, is not personal weakness. It's evidence that the world's unhealed wounds have found a host. And this is where empowerment begins. Because once you understand that the feeding isn't just them, it's the collective unconscious itself, you realize your task is not to absorb, but to transmute through awareness. To become not a sponge, but an alchemist, not the victim of energy exchange, but the conscious participant in it. You learn to metabolize emotional charge into insight, compassion into wisdom, pain into discernment. That is how the empath becomes the seer, the one who feels deeply but is no longer consumed. But every transformation has a shadow. The moment you begin to reclaim your boundaries, the world will test them. Some will call you selfish, cold, unavailable. They will accuse you of being what they secretly fear, free. This is the empath's crucifixion. The moment when saying no feels like betrayal, when detachment feels like cruelty. You will be tempted to go back, to reopen your channels, because part of you still craves the emotional intensity of being needed. That's your addiction, the familiar high of psychic fusion. Be warned, there's a phase after awakening where the empath becomes the cynic, disillusioned, armored, suspicious of connection. They mistake withdrawal for self-protection. But that's not individuation. That's isolation. The goal is not to harden, it's to clarify. The true boundary is not a wall, it's transparency. You become so aware of your own energy that you no longer fear others. You see manipulation not as an attack, but as a signal, someone still lost in their shadow. And here's Jung's ultimate warning. Beware of making an identity out of empathy. If you define yourself solely by your sensitivity, you unconsciously keep yourself in situations that validate it, chaos, pain, imbalance. You will seek out suffering because it gives your identity purpose. You will become addicted to being the healer, not because you love healing, but because you fear who you are without it. This is the empath's ego trap. To stay the good one, even when that goodness becomes self-destruction. Empathy, like any power, requires ritual, maintenance, self-regulation. Here are Jung-inspired practices, not spiritual tricks, but psychological hygiene. 1. Morning differentiation practice. Before interacting with anyone, name aloud 3 emotions that belong only to you. This grounds the psyche in self-awareness before you enter others' fields. 2nd, energetic audit. After every conversation, ask, do I feel lighter or heavier? If heavier, visualize returning what's not yours, not with hostility, but with neutrality. 3. Contemplative solitude. Jung retreated often into nature, into silence. He said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." Empaths must learn to sit in their own vibration, without rescue missions, without distractions. 4. Shadow journaling. Each night, write 1 line answering, what part of me was I trying to fix in someone else today? This reveals projections in real time. 5. The law of reciprocity. Only engage in relationships, personal or professional, that show a balance of giving and receiving. Where there is no reciprocity, there can be no true empathy, only extraction. 6. Embodied boundaries. Boundaries are not just words, they are posture, tone, breath. When you speak from grounded embodiment, the psychic field responds. Energy predators sense resistance and move on. 7. Emotional composting. When you feel drained, don't analyze, move, dance, walk, create. Burn letters you'll never send. The body is the unconscious's language. Let it metabolize what the mind cannot. With these practices, empathy stops being your weakness and becomes your intelligence, your finely tuned instrument for truth. Carl Jung believed that the greatest danger is not the darkness itself, but unconsciousness of it. Once you bring light to what feeds on you, it loses power. You realize no one can truly feed on you unless you consent, energetically, emotionally, or unconsciously. You begin to live in conscious exchange. You give intentionally, and therefore you never deplete. You feel for others deeply, but you no longer carry their burden. You walk into the world not as prey, but as mirror, reflecting back to others their own unintegrated self. The empath's journey ends not in isolation, but in sovereignty, a state where compassion and self-preservation coexist, where love is not sacrifice, it's clarity. And something magical happens here. The same sensitivity that once made you a target now becomes your radar. You can sense the manipulator before they speak. You can feel the truth beneath the performance. You can walk through chaos untouched because you finally know what belongs to you. This is power, not domination, but differentiation. The awareness that your energy is sacred and therefore selective. Jung described the self as the totality of the psyche, conscious and unconscious, light and dark, unified under awareness. When the empath integrates their shadow, the desire to be needed, the hidden pride of the savior, the fear of being alone, they approach this self. They stop oscillating between extremes of self-sacrifice and self-protection. They become whole, circular, complete. No longer host, no longer victim. Just aware. You begin to see others not as threats or dependents, but as mirrors of potential. You stop fighting the energy vampire because you realize they are what you once were, unaware of their shadow. And so your compassion deepens, not as absorption, but as wisdom. You can stand before the devouring archetype and see it clearly, without fear, because you have faced it in yourself. There's one final revelation, Jung's most chilling and most liberating. You are not only the empath, you are also the feeder. Every time you seek validation, attention, emotional rescue, you feed. Every time you withhold truth to preserve connection, you feed. Every time you manipulate through kindness, you feed. The empath's shadow is the same archetype they fear, and until that truth is faced, the feeding continues. Both ways. This is why Jung said, "No tree can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell." To become whole, you must descend. To see the part of you that feeds on being needed, that takes pride in pain, that finds identity in suffering. To love that part without indulging it. To integrate it into consciousness. Only then do you stop the cycle, only then does empathy become wisdom. You are not here to carry others. You are here to illuminate them by refusing to abandon yourself. You are not the healer of the world. You are the mirror through which the world remembers how to heal itself. You do not exist to absorb pain. You exist to transform it by becoming so conscious that nothing can attach without your consent. From this moment forward, you live as the conscious empath, the one who walks into rooms with their energy intact, the one who gives without losing, the one who sees the feeders and no longer fears them, because they are seen. You embody Jung's ultimate teaching, that what we are aware of no longer controls us. So remember this: empathy without awareness is martyrdom. Empathy with awareness is mastery. The world doesn't need you to suffer for its wounds. It needs you awake enough not to inherit them. In the next episode, we'll explore deeper the people whom you cannot trust, 6 types of people to avoid, and how this knowledge can be used to strengthen your own shadow. We'll expose how subtle energies hijack empathy and how to reclaim your psychic center so that feeling deeply no longer means losing yourself. Until then, stay conscious, stay whole. And remember, they can only feed on you if you forget who you are.